I used to think that manifestation was just an esoteric idea, something that worked but was beyond scientific understanding. But as someone who needs to understand the reasoning behind things, I went deep, like really deep, into the science that correlates to the law of attraction. And what I found was that there are multiple scientific concepts which relate to, and in some cases even prove, different aspects of manifestation, from how our brain filters information to how quantum wave functions collapse, and more. In this video, I'm going to break down some of the most popular scientific explanations for manifestation. I'm going to explain how they relate to it, what they prove, and I'm also going to highlight some of the popular claims that edge towards pseudoscience so that we can understand the science of manifestation without spreading misinformation. My name's Georgia. I have a master's degree in consciousness, spirituality and transpersonal psychology, and in my free time I love to research manifestation and the science behind shifting our reality. Now, when it comes to manifestation, at least in its most esoteric sense, there isn't a single scientific theory that fully explains it, at least not yet. However, there are many different scientific concepts which correlate to different aspects of manifestation, from its most basic conception that it's simply about us priming our minds, right to the most esoteric form of manifestation, the idea that our thoughts can actually influence the external world. Personally, I believe in manifestation because of my own experience of it, but I think understanding the science helps us in two key ways. Firstly, it gives us clues as to how manifestation works, and as a result, it empowers us to use it effectively. And the second way is that it validates our belief in manifestation. Now, this is crucial because manifestation is all about believing. You have to believe that it is possible to manifest, and that is much easier to do when you understand the scientific correlations. So in this video, I'm going to cover 4 potential scientific explanations for manifestation, starting with the least esoteric, going towards the most esoteric. I'm going to explain how each one correlates to manifestation, exactly what it proves, and I'm also going to dispel some common misconceptions so that we gain an accurate understanding of the science behind manifestation. So the first explanation we're going to look at is all about neuroscience and psychology. We're going to start here because this one is the most grounded and well-supported explanation of manifestation, at least part of it. So what the overarching idea is in this explanation is that neuroscience and psychology essentially prove that our brains don't just passively record reality, they actively construct it. There is an objective world out there, but we perceive a filtered version of it based on our past experiences and beliefs and focus. It's like everyone's seeing reality through colour-tinted glasses, but everyone's glasses have a slightly different tint. And through harnessing certain neuroscientific and psychological principles, you can choose a new pair of glasses and see a different reality as a result. So let's look at a couple of scientific concepts to back this theory up. The first is the reticular activating system. This is a physical system in our brain. It's essentially a bundle of nerves in our brainstem that filters the information we take in. It basically decides what information reaches our conscious awareness based on what we focus on or pay attention to. So let's imagine, for example, you really want a new red car, so you've been paying a lot of attention to red cars. Now, your brain is going to deem that important, and so suddenly you're going to start seeing red cars everywhere. This isn't magic, this is just your brain prioritizing data that matches what it now considers important. From a manifestation perspective, if you focus on all of the things you don't want, like bills, like the job you hate, like illness, then your brain is going to filter in information that accords with those things because that's what it's going to deem important. And at the same time, it's going to filter out information that aligns with the reality that you do want to experience, including opportunities that would bring you closer to your goals. So the reticular activating system is scientific proof that what you focus on actively shapes what you perceive. Another way that your brain filters reality is through confirmation bias. Basically, your brain loves to be right even when your beliefs are wrong. It will serve you evidence to confirm your existing beliefs to you, whatever those beliefs are. So if you believe that you are unworthy, then your brain is going to search for evidence to back up that belief. So you're going to notice any instance where you don't do something well. Maybe you don't do as well as you would like on an exam, or you're going to notice instances in conversations where people have responded to you in an unfriendly way. And you're going to use instances like that to confirm the belief to you that you are not good enough, that you're unworthy. On the other hand, if you change your beliefs by practicing self-love, by programming the belief that you are good enough into your mind, then your mind is going to start serving you new evidence to confirm that belief. So you'll notice instances where you have done really well at something. You'll notice when you have interactions with people where people are being receptive to you and speaking to you like you are someone who is worth speaking to. So whatever you believe is what you will experience, not because it's objectively true, but because you are priming your brain to seek out evidence to confirm your beliefs to you. So both of these concepts, the reticular activating system and confirmation bias, offer proof for at least part of manifestation. They show that your inner world shapes your outer experience. By changing your thoughts and your beliefs, you change what you perceive and what you experience as a result. So these concepts prove that our minds influence our experience of reality, but they don't prove the more esoteric aspects of manifestation, which leads me on to the next explanation. So our next explanation proves that beliefs alone can have real measurable effects. Now what I'm talking about is the placebo effect, which is a very well documented medical phenomenon, and it proves that our beliefs can cause real physiological changes. So the literature on the placebo effect shows that it works in two key ways. The first way is through expectation. So if you have some expectation of a therapeutic benefit, that a medication is going to heal you, for example, then your body can respond accordingly. It can actually heal as a result of that expectation. So for example, there was a study done on patients who have Parkinson's disease. Now, they told the patients that they had a specific probability of receiving dopamine. So they might have been told that they had a 25% probability, or a 50%, or a 75%, or a 100%. Now, in actual fact, none of the patients received dopamine. They were all given a placebo. And what's really interesting is the patients who believed they had a higher chance of receiving dopamine, because they'd been told a higher percentage, had an actual greater release of dopamine in their body. So the expectation alone caused a measurable effect. Now, interestingly, studies have shown that expectation might be most effective when it comes to conscious physiological processes like the increase or decrease of pain or motor functions. So that's something to keep in mind if you're trying to manifest a specific physiological change. Now, the second way the placebo effect has been shown to work is through conditioning. This one is more subconscious. It's essentially where you repeatedly associate a conditioned response with a specific stimulus, and eventually what happens is the body can recreate that effect with the neutral stimulus alone. So for example, you could associate the effect of a specific medication with a neutral stimulus like a sugar pill, and if you do this enough, then eventually the sugar pill alone should be able to elicit the same effects as the medication without having to take the medication. Now, interestingly, unlike expectation, studies have shown that conditioning tends to work best with unconscious physiological processes, such as the immune response or hormone secretion. So again, that's just another thing to keep in mind if you're trying to manifest some type of physiological effect. Now, an important thing to note is that the placebo effect works both ways. It can also have negative effects. This is known as the nocebo effect, and this is also very well documented in the literature. For example, you can increase pain through expecting pain. You can also reduce the effectiveness of medication through your beliefs. Now, whether it's the placebo or the nocebo, these effects prove that your beliefs and expectations can lead to real physiological changes. So this shows that your thoughts can affect your physical reality. Now, of course, the placebo effect is limited to your physical body. So the question is, can it go beyond this? Can your thoughts influence the external world? This leads me on to the two next potential explanations. So one popular explanation for manifestation is that your thoughts, or you as a whole, emit a frequency, like tuning a radio. The idea is that by aligning the frequency of your thoughts to what you desire, you broadcast a signal which attracts those things back into your life. So is this true? Do our thoughts actually emit a frequency? To unpack this, we first need to understand that there are two key aspects to thoughts. So first we have the non-physical aspect. This is the subjective experience of the thought. So we all know what it's like to think. We do it all day, every day. Our thoughts are introspective. They're not something that we can directly measure with instruments. But there is also another aspect of thoughts, and that is the physical aspect. This is the biological activity that happens in our brain when we are thinking. So when we think a thought, neurons fire and they send electrochemical signals. Now these signals, in a very real sense, are forms of energy. Now, you might believe that these two aspects of thoughts, the non-physical and the physical aspects, are one and the same, but if you're not a materialist, as I suspect many of you are not, then it's useful to separate these two aspects, because ultimately no one knows which is the cause of the other. Basically, this all comes down to the hard problem of consciousness, which is one of the biggest mysteries remaining in science. Basically, consciousness itself is a complete mystery, and while we know it correlates to brain activity, we do not know that brain activity produces it. So it's important to keep this in mind when we're talking about thoughts. We know that thinking correlates to certain activity in the brain, but we do not know that one is a product of the other. So with that in mind, let's look at the physical aspect more deeply, because at least from a scientific perspective, this is the only way we're going to get close to thoughts having a frequency. So as we've mentioned, our thoughts occur alongside neural activity, which is electrochemical in nature. So our neurons fire and they produce tiny electrical signals. So the rhythmic patterns of this electrical activity produced by the brain are called brain waves. Now these brain waves have a frequency, and that can be measured by an EEG. So for example, 4 of the main types of brainwaves that we go throughout the day are delta, theta, alpha and beta. Now the difference between these types of brainwaves is their frequency, which is measured in hertz. So delta, for example, is a type of brainwave we're in when we're asleep, and this has a low frequency. Beta, on the other hand, is a type of brainwave we're in when we're alert and we're doing a lot of thinking, and this has a much higher frequency. So in this sense, thoughts do have a frequency. The rhythmic pattern of electrical activity in our brain that accompanies our thoughts has a frequency. Now, I think it's also worth mentioning here that it's often stated that our emotions also have a frequency. I'm sure you've seen the emotional frequency chart, which essentially shows that negative emotions, or at least emotions that feel unpleasant, such as grief or jealousy, have a low frequency, whereas other emotions that are seen as positive, such as love or gratitude, have a higher frequency. Now, the thing about this chart is that it actually came from a book by Dr. David Hawkins called Power versus Force, and the way he got this chart was essentially through a method called applied kinesiology, which is a type of muscle testing which he essentially used to calibrate the frequencies of these different emotions. Now, this technique is very interesting, but it's not scientific in a traditional sense. There aren't actually any studies which have been able to measure the frequency of emotions. Now, I'm not saying that emotions don't have a frequency. I believe they probably do, but at least for this video we're focusing on explanations that are more scientifically proven, so it's important to understand the origins of these kind of things. Now, going back to brainwaves, because these actually have been proven to have a frequency. So brainwaves are the patterns of this electrical activity that happens in the brain, and this activity generates an electromagnetic field. Now, the issue with this electromagnetic field is that it's really weak, like millions of times weaker than a light bulb or a cell phone. So whilst this field has been detected outside of the brain, specifically it's been detected on the scalp, there's currently no scientific evidence to suggest that these electromagnetic fields can extend quite far outside of the brain and actually influence the external world. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that this explanation of manifestation is wrong. It is worth noting that we as humans can only perceive certain frequencies. For example, we can only hear a certain sound range, and we can only see a certain range of the electromagnetic spectrum, visible light specifically. There are a huge range of frequencies that we're not able to detect through our 5 senses. So it's also worth exploring the idea that maybe there are frequencies of our thoughts and our emotions that our scientific instruments also can't detect. So there could be truth to the idea that we do emit a frequency and that somehow influences our reality, but at least for the time being, it's not a very strong scientific explanation for manifestation. The radio analogy is a great metaphor, but the idea that our thoughts resonate with the universe doesn't hold up just yet. However, all is not lost, because we're now going to go on to another explanation for manifestation that might more strongly indicate that our thoughts can actually influence external reality. So now we're going to explore the most mysterious scientific fields that is often linked to manifestation, and that is quantum physics. You've probably heard people talking about the double slit experiment when it comes to the idea that you can create your own reality. So let's look at what actually happened in that experiment and how it accurately relates to manifestation, because it's often misrepresented, but when you understand the true links, it opens up more correlations, not less. Imagine you have a tiny particle like an electron. Traditionally, we would think of these like tiny little balls that exist in a specific place and a specific time, like we would expect all physical objects to exist. So if you fire a bunch of electrons through two slits, what you would expect to happen is them to behave like tiny bullets, going through one slit or the other and forming two clusters on the screen behind. But that's not what happens. Instead, the particles create an interference pattern, like they're behaving like waves, not particles. This doesn't mean that the electron splits and goes through both slits at once like a wave does. Instead, quantum mechanics tells us that an electron in this state exists in a superposition, a state where all possibilities coexist. For instance, the possibility of going through slit A and slit B at the same time. Now, this is all very confusing and there's a lot of debate about what this actually means, but when we're talking about the electron being in a superposition, try and think of it like its state is undetermined, like it's somehow in a state of all possibilities at once, and not that it is like a wave. Despite the interference pattern, we can't say that the electron in this state actually is a wave, only that it behaves like one. The best we can do is say that its state is undetermined. The properties of the electron, like its position or its spin, are undetermined. It's not in one position or another, it behaves in a way as if it's a blend of all possibilities at once. Now, it gets even weirder than this, believe it or not. Now, when scientists place a detector at the slits to figure out which path the electron is taking, something very strange happens. The interference pattern disappears and the electrons start behaving like particles again. They go through one slit or the other. Now, this phenomenon is known as the observer effect. Just the act of taking a measurement changes the outcome. So the electron transforms from being in its undetermined state, the state where it's in a superposition of multiple possibilities, to being in a defined state, so it takes on one state out of the different possibilities. This transformation is known as the collapse of the wave function. So the wave function describes all of the different possibilities when the electron is in a superposition, and upon measurement, those possibilities collapse. So that's why this is known as the collapse of the wave function. Now, it's important to note that the observer in the observer effect doesn't necessarily mean a human or a conscious being. Observation in quantum physics actually means measurement, so it means some kind of interaction that disturbs the system. But there are some interpretations of quantum physics which go further, and this is where we correlate to manifestation. So the first very intriguing interpretation is called the consciousness collapse model. Now, this interpretation suggests that it's not measurement that causes the collapse, instead it's conscious awareness that causes the wave function to collapse. In other words, your mind might be the thing that turns potential into reality. If this is true, then it could mean that your consciousness is actively involved in physically shaping reality. Your mind might actually be able to influence reality at the quantum level, so actually external reality beyond just your physical body. So whilst quantum physics doesn't prove that your consciousness can influence reality, it's certainly an option. And understanding that this is just one option actually opens up the door to another equally as fascinating interpretation that also relates to manifestation. So the next interpretation is the many worlds interpretation. Now, we've already talked about how the double slit experiment implies that an electron goes from being in this weird undetermined state where it seems to be existing in multiple states at once, how it goes from this state and that state collapses into a determined state. Now, the many worlds interpretation actually suggests that multiple possibilities doesn't collapse. Instead, each of them branches into a separate universe. So instead of just one possibility being selected, the many worlds interpretation says that instead, all possibilities actually exist, but they exist in parallel realities. So when you measure the electron reality splits, and you find yourself in one branch where the electron took one path, but there is also another reality in which another version of you sees the electron taking the other path. So this interpretation sounds a lot like some of the more esoteric takes on manifestation, like quantum jumping, where you shift into a reality that matches your desired outcome. Now I have to note here that this interpretation says nothing about whether it's possible to shift between these realities or how you would be able to do that, but the fact that this is a valid interpretation at all is truly mind-blowing. So does quantum physics prove manifestation? Not quite, but it does show us that reality at the fundamental level is not as fixed or solid as we once thought. It's governed by probabilities and possibilities until something causes one outcome to manifest. Whether that something is consciousness or a measurement, or whether all possibilities exist in parallel realities, or whether it's something completely different is up for debate. But quantum physics opens the door to possibilities that question our classical view of reality, and those possibilities do correlate with the more esoteric aspects of manifestation. Now, if you want to go even deeper into the links between manifestation and quantum physics, you can watch this video here. In this video, I explain a theory which suggests how consciousness might be able to collapse the wave function. But for now, you can see that manifestation and science are not separate. There are plenty of scientific concepts which either correlate with, or in some instances, prove manifestation and the power of our mind in shifting our reality. Let me know in the comments which you think is the most convincing explanation for manifestation, or if you have a completely alternative explanation for manifestation, I'd love to hear it. Thank you so much for watching. Please give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed, and I hope to see you in the next one.